I'm going to heal all my trauma before I turn 40. Amy Guerrero joins us to talk about healing and living a sober conscious life. She talks about somatic experiencing, attachment theory, and the trauma informed modalities she uses at Thrive in Recovery. She intentionally meets people where they are at after feeling like she was asked as a patient to abandon deep belief systems. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery. Ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Neider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates.
Oh, Kurt and I are here today with Amy Guerrero. Amy is a trauma-informed recovery coach, conscious, sober person, and founder of Thrive in Recovery. Thrive in Recovery is a coaching practice developed for sober people to heal their trauma, find success, and create healthy relationships with people, money, and themselves. Amy has learned how to go from admitting she is powerless to living powerfully, and believes it is her ultimate act of service to share her journey with others. Amy, I'm super excited to talk with you today and have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to see your faces and to be here with you. And I just love how our conversation started before we pressed record, and this advocation of like, what does advocating even look like, especially in the space of recovering. And something that I just love about getting to see people from all over the world and do these conversations, have these conversations, make this with the world, is that, like, in my opinion, we're all recovering from something. And especially right now, like today on September 7th, while we're recording this, I'm just feeling just so much emotion for what is happening. I recently moved to Texas from California, and so I'm feeling that friction that we were talking about before. You know, I'm like, oh wow, like I really have I grew up here, but I left here and moved to California and lived in California my whole adult life. And still remember actually when I was introduced to trauma work was in Austin, Texas in the late 90s, like 97, 98 is when the first time I was introduced to somatic experiencing and the yoga mat and all of these things that led me to where I am today. And now coming back in this time where there's like bounties, literally, like I'm like, okay, I'm back in Texas, and how can I stand in my truth as a conscious woman who chooses a life, not just of recovery, of also of being in my truth and being in full acceptance of everything that's happening around me, knowing that I'm not responsible for how anyone behaves except for really myself. And that's what Thrive in Recovery is all about. And so much of what my journey is to landing in this space, because getting sober was really hard for me because I wasn't being met where I was at. And that was probably that's the easiest way to put it. And I'm sure that so many people that you all have the benefit of supporting feel that same way, right? They're just like, no one's listening to me. And there's nothing more awful than being chemically dependent on something that used to be your favorite coping mechanism. learning that like I couldn't continue to live my life if I didn't take this substance out of my life, because I was just so chemically dependent on it. I mean, I really went to the rocks of the bottoms. I was like, I drug myself along the bottom. And it all started because I was like, I'm going to heal all my trauma before I turn 40.
How's that working out?
Just
Well,
be fixed.
Exactly. I mean, I would say that it was the best thing that I did was becoming chemically dependent on alcohol, because that got me, first of all, I went to find my birth mom. You know, I hadn't seen or talked to her. That's my original incident, was abandonment. And my nervous system just never learned how to regulate on its own, because I didn't have that secure attachment as an infant, as a baby, growing up, and didn't have that. So I knew that for a long time. I knew that there was something off with my nervous system, that I just couldn't cope the way that other people with secure attachment coped. So when I went and found her, that's when I used my favorite coping mechanism, and it didn't go as I thought it would. And so suddenly I'm shaking in the morning and chemically dependent on my favorite thing. However, when you ask me like, how's it going? It did actually lead me to the path of recovery that I'm able to walk in now. And so without that, like, big, huge, like, oh gosh, mission that I went on, without a net. And so I created Thrive in Recovery because I didn't have a support system in place when I went out on this journey. I had one or two people who knew what I was up to, one of them being a healer who actually was able to support me through a lot of this process and really helped me understand the ancestral trauma that I was going to face and all of the things. But I was, you know, pretty stubborn, pretty, in a lot of pain. And my pain was leading my charge instead of my consciousness. And so, you know, that was what led me here. And when people are like, oh my gosh, what a bummer that you had to get sober. And I'm like, well, actually, I would have never, ever, ever been able to actually start the process of truly healing what was underneath of there without getting the substance out of the way, without getting the sugar out of the way. I mean, I choose consciousness on a lot of different levels, and it was the best thing that happened to me. I mean, those 2 years were raunchy, and I was very suicidal, and my family and friends had to watch me, you know, at some really awful places. And I would have rather died than lived sober the way that I was being taught to. So that's what led me to create Thrive in Recovery. It was an intense while, you know, and also if it didn't happen, I wouldn't be able to hold space the way that I do now and advocate for people and teach them how to advocate for themselves. So, yeah.
Well, Amy, you talked about meeting people where they're at and that you didn't really feel like you experienced that. Can you talk about what that looked like? Describe what it looked like to not be met where you were at, and describe what it might look like, what it would have looked like to be met where you were at?
Yeah, for sure, Shelley. That's a great question. You know, okay, so what it felt like is that people expected me to immediately like fall to what it felt like in my nervous system, what it felt like in my body was that I was being asked to abandon my deepest belief systems in order to not die and stay sober one day at a time. And that's what it felt like. It felt like, oh, here I go again, abandoning myself, being told that, like, I can't trust myself. And I was like, like, that doesn't make sense. Like, I think I can trust myself. I'm just really confused and in a lot of pain right now. It felt, it felt very similar to what I experienced as a child. You know, I felt like I was being talked down to. I felt like, if I didn't start calling myself an addict and an alcoholic, that I wasn't going to ever make it. That I remember one therapist told me that that I'm going to be one of the tough ones, and I probably won't make it. And I was like, wow, that's really hardcore. And I get it, like that person had been in one type of recovery for a really long time. And so that's the belief system that had been put in this person's head. And no wrongdoing, just really hurtful to me where I was at. And I also believed it in a sense because I couldn't see how I was going to get out of the dark hole that I was in. You know, I mean, I knew that after I left treatment, I was going to drink again or party again. Like, I knew it. I was like, well, if I'm going to die anyways, then I might as well, you know, use my coping mechanism to make that happen. So that it felt violating, and it was awful. And then I didn't, because my parents and my family and the world really isn't educated on, you know, how to handle a recovery process. Basically, everyone outside of the treatment center was like, well, if you don't listen to them, like, we don't know what to tell you. And so, you know, it's your fault. And it just came back to that, like, oh my God, everything is my fault. And that was already my original incident. It's like, it's all my fault. It's my fault that my mom couldn't handle me. I've been too much since I was born. Like, I'm too much. And now I'm too much here. So, ooh, that's bringing up emotion. I'm like, oh my gosh, I might cry. Yeah, so that's what it felt like. It felt yucky.
Oh, it seems intense. I can see that emotion on you, and those things. I mean, it's one thing to talk about it, but what you're saying, these are intense, deeply felt belief systems, right? That you created as a child who didn't know any better, right? Who didn't know there was any other options. And I can't think of too many experiences that are more painful or that I've seen create more pain in someone's life than adoption or abandonment by a primary caregiver, you know, significant abandonment. I mean, a child just has no way of understanding how to manage that or what to do with it. And so it has to be their fault. And I'm sure of course, because you've talked about the fact that it was about you, right? You were not enough. You were not this, you were not that, because that's all that a child really knows how to comprehend. We need our primary caregivers to take care of us, so they can't be flawed. They have to be okay. So I love the way you are able to describe that and be so vulnerable with us too. I appreciate that. So thank you for that. I'm curious, we could talk about so much stuff, but we're not going to dive too much deeper into that because we don't want you know, to be blubber and not be able to talk.
No, we do.
Well, I do. I mean, it's my nature to go there, but, you know, we don't have to do that. But I'm curious.
You know what, Shelley? I do want to share something because
Yes.
you just helped me remember that this is very relevant. So I have a new container that I opened called Recover the Trust. And I believe so much that learning this process, it's a process, it's a lifetime that I'm signing up for of consciousness. And about 5 days before I built this whole experience for people, my birth mom reached out to me, and I hadn't talked to her in about a couple of years. And her first email to me was that she'd been studying nurturing an infant, and that she realizes that she abandoned me and she didn't do it right. And I was like, awesome. My hope, you know, my little girl inside me got like very excited. And then the next email was that as a 7-year-old, and she's referring to this time where I had to go to court to say that I didn't want to have anything to I don't want to live with her, but she still got visitation rights. And she said that that as a 7-year-old that I should really own what I did as a 7-year-old because I was defiant as a 7-year-old. And so, you know, this stuff sounds really deep. And as a conscious woman today, like, it hurt. And I trust myself so much to be able to go, oh, wow, that's the old stuff that I used to think I wasn't enough for, to pick up over, to maybe even cancel, recover the trust, and just fall into a dorsal, you know, collapsed place. And now I'm like, oh, wow, like, that is painful, no doubt, to hear. And it just shows me that recovery is so possible, and integration is so possible, and I have no control over her opinion, right? And so I do believe that like this advocation process, this recovery process, it doesn't ever just like, oh, it doesn't just end, right? And I feel like that's such a relevant point to this, because as a woman who holds space in these places, like I still walk the talk every moment. And my original incidences, things that I used to just hurt myself over, like I can now with confidence say that like, oh, okay, like yes, that hurts and it's painful, and it doesn't have the same power or the same activation that it used to have. And that's what I feel like a lifetime of choosing consciousness is all about. So for the listeners out there, like it's so possible. And it's not that we're not going to be confronted with the same things. You know, it's just that we choose not to pick up or hurt ourselves over it.
Mm. Well, and what you just shared is the fact that at 7 years old, you were asked to make a decision that was an adult decision that, I mean, how many of us would put a 7-year-old in that position in, you know, in a healthy place? How many of us would ever go, yeah, 7-year-olds can decide where they should live and what's healthy and what's not for them, right? But
well,
then
a Texas judge would.
yeah, but then to come back and have your mom reiterate, you know, you need to take ownership of that 7-year-old, like, you got to be kidding me. You just poured more shame and guilt upon this poor little 7-year-old that I've been working on healing. And I can tell you've come so far in your ability to accept, to recognize what's yours and what's not, and to be able to stay in a good space and still hold space for those emotions that still come up, which are painful and hurtful.
Yeah. And I think that polarity, you know, it's like, that's the thing. It's like I can still hold space because that 7-year-old inside of me is still going to have that wrenching response of like, somebody pay attention to me, please, right? And how can I be that for her? And that's so much of what, you know, Thrive in Recovery is all about. It's like, yes, those parts of us are going to continue to need what they didn't get when we were younger, and how can we learn how to ask for those things? And again, it's back to advocating, right? It's and we so often get stuck in our throat chakra and our heart chakra of like, no, because I behaved badly. I mean, believe me, my patterns and behaviors when I was, especially at the end of my drinking, were not, you know, in my right mind. However, that doesn't mean that I don't deserve all of the things that I desire, and that I can choose to create them for myself and for the younger parts of me. Mm. And that's what I teach.
I love it. And I'm going to just describe your hand motions and what you were saying, because I don't think people, they might, I knew exactly what you were saying, but I could see your motions. But that putting down, right, that chakra in the neck and the throat area, because we can't speak it and we have to hide it and we have to push it back down and we have to, you know, contain all of those emotions and feelings is what your hand motions and your body language was saying. So I just wanted to share that with the listeners.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, and you know, that's often when people are reaching out, that's where they are. Like, help me stuff this back down. And I'm like, actually, I'm going to help you bring it to the light and, you know, fall in love with all of the parts of you, even, you know, the messy, disorganized, weird ones, because they're all a part of you. And that's a beautiful part about being human.
Oh, isn't it though? And I don't know if this I was just thinking that there's times, you know, I've done my work and I'm still doing my work, but there are times that I go, man, can I just go back to being numb and not feeling again, right? Because it still feels sometimes really strong and powerful, those emotions that come up, and having tools to be able to sit with those and experience them and process those and become familiar and curious about those is super helpful. But that doesn't mean we don't still have, you know, these really difficult experiences in life, because we do. And COVID has done nothing but reinforce the fact that we're human.
Absolutely. 100%. And, you know, I also want to speak to that as well. If the thought comes across my mind of like, oh, it was easier when I was numb, or I wish I had that ability to be able to check out like I see so many people in the world doing, then I also don't beat myself up or get mad at myself for having that thought. It's not like I'm on a path to relapse because I have that thought. I'm like, oh no, I'm just very human. But we scare people into saying if they have one thought like that, that they're going to be back to the, drug of choice in a matter of days or weeks. And I'm like, that's not actually true. Like, and if you can actually feel safe enough to tell someone that you're having that thought, that's going to even be easier. And the thought's going to go away, and we're going to move through it together, and it's going to be okay.
Well, that's funny, because isn't it, if we can name it and describe it and experience it, then we tame it, right? Isn't that the way it goes? Is if you can't talk about it and you're shoving it down and pretending like it's not there, that's more dangerous to relapse than anything I can think of.
Absolutely. Yeah, noticing and naming it is the biggest thing. And it's so empowering. It's like, oh, I know what my nervous system is doing. I know why these thoughts are there, and I don't have to make them wrong.
Yeah.
And that starts the process of relieving the guilt and the shame that so many people, maybe sometimes never actually get to in their life in recovery. And that was one of the things that scared me when I was rolling around in different recovery methodologies. When I would sit in circles with people and would listen to people that had 20, 30 years and were still kind of stuck in that shame spiral, I was like, I'm not sure that's where I want to be in 20 or 30 years. Nothing wrong, nothing right about it. It just wasn't what I wanted to be. And so going back to meeting myself where I was at, I was like, I want to find people that want to help me, like, really expand in the ways that I would like to expand in. And stay curious with me and be in the process of discovery.
Yeah. And to what we're talking about, I remember the first time I was in a group where it felt safe to share, and they were all sharing, and I'm like, oh my heck, you can really talk about this stuff? You can really share this stuff, and it's okay, and people aren't looking at you like, what did you just say? And that was a light bulb for me, going, oh wow. This is not something I've ever been taught before. We're taught in families that we don't talk about those kinds of things. We don't talk about our whatever our family secrets are. And so it just, that brought up for me that realization of, there are safe places and safe people that can manage these kinds of stories, generational wounds or whatever they are, right? So I love that you're creating a space for that with your Thrive in Recovery. I'm curious about Thrive in Recovery. At what place in the recovery process does Thrive fit in? Is it, because I know we've got residential and inpatient, and we've got outpatient and different levels of care. Where does Thrive fit into that?
Yeah, so I think that there's really two different places that I fit into the process. One is actually like, when you leave, then you have to start living your life. And that was one of the big things that I saw missing, especially in a lot of the treatment centers that I worked at, and then also that I was in as a client. There was like a revolving door, and especially the people, I'm just going to say it, that had a lot of money, they were back within a few days. And it was almost as if they were more comfortable in treatment than they were outside of their home, 16, 17, 18, 19, 22 times in treatment. And they were just like, oh, this is the way to do it. And so, coming out of that process and into life is a place where Thrive in Recovery fits in. Another place that Thrive in Recovery fits in is when someone isn't able to find a residential place, or doesn't want to take that time to go there and hasn't really figured out what's going on yet. I'm really able to support them to understand, okay, wait, I know it's easier to just talk about the alcohol and the drugs and to make it all about that, but there's something so much deeper happening here. And so oftentimes I'm able to support people to really understand that. And then if we do need to take time outside of life in a safe place, then I can recommend some place for them to go that will be really safe for them to detox and have the substance out of their life. And oftentimes I'm working with people that have 15, 20 years of sobriety, and haven't felt that consciousness yet, haven't woken up. And so this is oftentimes when someone is trying to start a business, or is parting ways in a relationship, or is ready to experience deep, awesome, powerful intimacy and love. And they're like, oh, I just can't seem to do this. I can stay sober one day at a time, and I can quote every single page of several different books, right? But I can't do relationships. So I'm like, okay, come, let's do this thing. Because of in my well, I can prove and show the data that what's really keeping them stuck is the attachment systems that were created when they were so young, and is that inflexibility of their nervous system to really be able to thrive. So those are three pretty clear examples of different stages of recovery that I'm able to support and find space for. And that's really in my one-on-one work. In the group work, definitely more people that have some regulation skills is a part of the process, so that we can all work together in this group setting, because that's when we get to actively practice role playing, clear, concise, compassionate communication, like really putting the polyvagal ladder to work and learning the nervous system, and putting people in groups of 4 and like them really going, oh my gosh, I'm gonna practice this conversation with you, and oh gosh, there's nothing more beautiful than watching people in groups that think maybe they would have never been able to have those conversations, and then go out and like start their business, get in a relationship, change jobs, do all those yummy life things.
It sounds wonderful. I have lots of questions. I always do, but I'm curious, and I just imagine that somebody out there's thinking the same thing. How does somebody pay for the services and treatment that you provide?
Yeah, so it's all, well, okay, like I can give you real examples of how people pay for it. Either they just pay for it because they have the ability to just pay for it outright. I do not accept any insurance or anything. It's all, it's your investment in yourself. I mean, one of the great things is that it's continuing education. So, all of it is able to be written off in your taxes as continuing education expenses, which is a beautiful part of continuing your education as a human in the world. If someone is like, I really want to do this and I don't see how I'm going to do it yet, then I start working with them. Like, okay, like if it's a full body yes for me and for them, then we start coaching together on that call, right? Like, well, where's your money going? What's been happening with your money? What we find out more often than not is that how you relate to one thing is how you relate to everything, and that disorganization has been living in their finances where they just haven't learned. And so a big part of Thrive in Recovery is getting very clear on your financial health, because what are the two most common things that take people back into their old coping mechanism? Relationships, sex, and money. And now I'm going to point down to my bottom chakras here. That all lives in the area where we've been numbing, and we've been drowning, it with alcohol, or numbing it with oxys or heroin, or upping it with methadone, or with meth or cocaine, right? So it's like, it all makes sense, but we will start talking about like, okay, how can you start really investing in yourself and in your recovery? Because, what we know so much about choice is that when I open up my wallet and say, like, I'm ready to invest in the next level of my recovery, I'm going to play full out. I'm going to play like I've never played before. And that's something that I do. That's for sure. I just invested like $20,000 in the last week into myself and my education. So, it's a process, and that's such a big part of this process. I love watching people have savings accounts and retirement accounts that they're proud of. And even super wealthy people, like, take control of their expenses, cancel all of these subscriptions that they haven't used, right? So we go and do that stuff together because it's so important.
I love it. I appreciate you explaining that. I also noticed that you work with somatic experiencing. You do other things, attachment theory and trauma-focused modalities, but Somatic experience, it's been around a long time, but I don't know that it's as well understood or as widely practiced as maybe some of the other modalities. Can you talk about that for a little bit and how you utilize it and the benefits you see?
Absolutely. So the easiest way for me to put it, and Peter Levine would probably say it a little differently because he helped us create all of this. It's the somatic experiencing is basically, so a lot of the approaches through the therapeutic models are top down. Somatic experiencing and the trauma-informed modalities are bottom up, meaning that we take in information from our bodies. And I know you know this, Shelley, but I'm explaining it for the listeners too. So we're neurocepting like all of this information through our bodies. Somatic experiencing is a process of giving the nervous system and the body the opportunity to complete experiences, to complete things that happened that are incomplete. So a very simple example is like if I was throwing a ball to you, Kurt, and you turned your head for a moment because you heard a loud noise and the ball hit you in the side of the head. You know, I would say like, oh, well, Kurt, like, let's go back to that day. What did you actually want to do? Oh, well, I wanted to turn around and put my hand up, catch the ball. Okay, cool. Like, can you imagine that in your mind? Can you imagine that in your body and giving your body the experience of completing that? And, oh my goodness, especially in the recovery space where there's so many blackouts and just time lost because we literally weren't conscious. There's so many incomplete things in the nervous system. And so I'm able to sometimes, like someone stuck around, let's say money, if we just use that as an example, well, what happened? What are you remembering right now? And going back and getting really curious in the body, what keeps us stuck around money? And then giving the body the opportunity to complete that response. And then they're going, I don't know why, I feel totally different. And then the next week, like they make $1,500 or whatever, and they're like, holy shit, that worked. And I'm like, yes, it did. So that's those are a couple of examples of what it looks like in my practice.
I love it. I love it. You know, you do a lot of work with clients. Is it just you, or do you have a whole team of people that work with these people?
Nope, right now it is just me. So often if someone has a team, has some type of team in place, then we'll all work together. And that's really cool. If they want to continue working with other practitioners, right now it's me that does most of the one-on-one work. And then of course when we're in a group, then everyone's supporting that. And you know, Shelley and Kurt, like so much of my practice is guiding people back to what they already know. You know, I don't claim to like do anything spectacular here. I know a lot of stuff and I can hold space. I'm not saying a whole lot during some of our calls. I'm just sitting back and really trusting that their body knows how to get them there. And I'm helping create that safety that maybe they've never felt in their lives. And then when it comes to tactile, like light stuff like that, I'm like, okay, like let me help you learn how to, you know, create contracts for your business and things like that. So I often become, you know, their business coach and things like that because I have that experience in my lifetime.
I love it. And it sounds like a lot, if not most of your work is done virtually, or do you do a lot face-to-face? What do you see happening there?
Yeah, so I was driving all around the Los Angeles area for a couple of years, and I was like, I'm taking my business online. So it's been online since 2018, mainly because the 405 is a nightmare, and I never want to drive on it. But so I took my business online, and it's been solely online. I do pre-COVID, I was doing in-person like events and workshops, and I think that'll happen again. Just when it feels safer for everyone.
I love it. I love what you've shared today, Amy. I love your energy and the work that you've done yourself personally and how you're translating that into work that you do with other individuals. It's very powerful, and I can tell you're very passionate about it.
Yes, I'm so passionate about it. Once you get me started, I'll just be like, and then. Yes.
I know that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to connect with you. They're going to want to reach out and see if it's, if working with you is a good fit. What's their best way of getting a hold of you?
Yeah, everything, Facebook, Instagram, my website is all Thrive in Recovery with Amy. Thrive in Recovery with Amy. So you don't have to wonder what it is. If you go to any of those places, I do a lot of video because I know that that's really helpful. So you can really get to know me just through my Instagram and my Facebook. I'm live 4 times a week. So there's lots of opportunities there, and I'm doing some kind of complimentary community event on Zoom at least twice a month. So there's lots of different ways to just be in community with me.
Oh, nice. I love that. I love that, that you give back like that and put yourself out there in positive ways in the community. I think that's so powerful. And it says a lot about your intentions.
Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned, I was reading some things, and one of the things that was mentioned is nothing happens in a bubble when it comes to addressing trauma and recovery. So maybe as we end today, maybe you could talk about nothing happens in a bubble. Talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it goes back to how we started. If it was going to work for me the way that other people wanted it to work for me, if they wanted to prescribe me this exact model of how I was going to get well, then that would have been the bubble. That it would have been really awesome, right? Like, it's safe, and they would have been like, oh my gosh, look at her, she's like our ideal client, which I would pretend to be in treatment, by the way. And I would pass with rising stars. Everyone's like, she's gonna make it. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
But that would have been like in the bubble. And my way of being in the world is like, how can I get curious? And Shelley, you did a great job of it. I use my hands a lot while I talk, and you watched that, and you can see that. That's not happening in any bubble, and I'm saying so much more in my nonverbal than maybe you can hear over this audio right now. And that's like being outside of the bubble. Can we get curious? Can we just investigate? What is that bringing up for you? What does that mean for you? Tell me more about that. And it creates so much safety and permission. Permission for the clients that are out there that feel misunderstood. And just want to be met where they're at. To actually say the thing like, well, here's the real deal. This is what's really going on. Because then we can support them so much more from that place. And maybe you contract again after that little bubble's kind of popped. And that's okay too. We're not going to keep forcing information out of you. We're going to meet you where you're at again. We're going to allow that contraction to happen. We're just going to sit here and wait until you're ready. And then another expansion will happen. And that's life.
It is. In and out of the bubble, right? Because we go to the bubble first when we don't feel safe. And then, and then we get ourselves regulated and we go, wait, I'm powerful. I have strength, and I want to show up a certain way, right? And we can learn to react in different ways than what feels just safe in the bubble.
Exactly.
It's powerful.
Yeah. And at first, being out of the bubble will be weird.
It takes a bit of practice, doesn't it?
It does.
Yes, that's for sure. Oh, Amy, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. You're fantastic. I've just loved your energy and your story and the wisdom that you have, and I've learned along the road. So I appreciate it so much having you on.
Oh, thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Kurt. It's lovely to be here, and I look forward to more down the line.
Thanks, Amy.